Hello. We wanted our all-age service this coming Sunday to look at the issue of food inequality and justice in the world today. Over the last couple of years, all-age service the week after Harvest Festival has tended to be an alternative take on harvest, if you like, a second harvest. This got me thinking about the idea of a second harvest. In biblical times, it could be said that the second harvest was the gleaning. We are going to look at the book of Ruth today, which is set in a gleaning after a harvest. A famine drove Elimelech and his family from Bethlehem to Moab, where he and his 2 sons unfortunately die, leaving his wife Naomi and her Moabite daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, widowed. Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem. Orpah eventually agrees, but Ruth loyally refuses and vows to stay with Naomi, adopting her people and her God. The chapter ends with Naomi and Ruth arising in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, with Naomi expressing her sorrow over her losses. I'm going to read now, beginning at chapter 2. Ruth meets Boaz in the grain field. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing, from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite woman, said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favour." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turns out, she was working in the field that belonged to Boaz, who was one from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of the harvest, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is a Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather amongst the sheaves behind your harvesters.' She came into the field and has remained there from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and do not go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked, "Why have I found such favour in your eyes that you've noticed me, a foreigner?" And Boaz replied, "I've been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favour in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have standing of one of your own servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip the wine in the vinegar. Dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather amongst the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out a few stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. Don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave to her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where have you gleaned today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is a close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth and the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with the workers until they've finished harvesting all my grain.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go to work with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. According to Action for Hunger, 1 in 12 people in the world do not have enough food. 35% of the world's population cannot afford to buy healthy, nourishing food. And 85% of people facing hunger crisis live in conflict-affected areas. God gave the Israelites a way of dealing with potential food inequality, called gleaning. Leviticus 19, 9-10 gives the following instructions to the Israelites when they are harvesting. First, they were to leave the margins of their field unharvested. Secondly, they were, when gathering in the wheat or the grapes and putting them into sheaves or bushels, if any were to fall to the floor, they were not to pick them up. And thirdly, when they went to the vineyards, they were only to harvest once. If more grapes grew back or were ripened later on in the harvest, presumably that benefited the gleaners, but also the wildlife. In giving these instructions, God makes provision for the poor, foreigners living in the land, widows and orphans. This is not an action of charity that is dependent on the benefactor's will or his compassion, but a duty, showing us God's love of justice. Through the practice of gleaning, the poor were sustained by leftovers. The landowners could forgo this part of the harvest and still be richly blessed. This challenges us to think about taking only what we need, and that we are called to share with others without a sense of entitlement to what we have. If our needs are provided for, then we must provide for others. Sometimes harvests do fail, as they did in chapter 1. However, often harvest is plentiful and there should be enough for everyone. It is human greed and sin that often leads to poverty and inequality. Even the seemingly natural disaster of a crop failure is increasingly caused by human damage to the environment and over-intensive farming. Food inequality is not what a just God had planned for us. Harvest is a time to remember God wants a just world. Donating to the Trussell Trust is the modern equivalent to leaving behind the wheat that falls from the bushel. Buying fair trade and supporting organisations like Christian Aid in standing against economic structures that deprive the poor of food is leaving the boundaries unharvested. And thinking about our carbon footprint and ecological impact is our equivalent to only taking one harvest from the vines. Ruth chapter 2 gives us 2 examples of just people that we can learn from and model our practices on. In verse 1, we are told that Boaz is recognised as a man of noble character. In the version I read earlier, he was described as a man of great standing, and some versions have him as a man of wealth. But the Hebrew phrase Gibor Chahil wasn't just describing a man of wealth and standing, it had implications of moral integrity. He is a man who people trust, respect, look up to. Throughout the chapter, we see why he is thought in those terms. Firstly, he shows kindness and hospitality to Ruth. He fulfills his obligation to provide for foreigners in the land, and he recognises her vulnerability and offers her protection. He shows his godly character by greeting his workers with a blessing and by praying for Ruth, saying, "May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord." Finally, by commanding his workers to pull out extra stalks and leave them for Ruth's, he shows generosity beyond that which was required of him, and he does it discreetly, not in a way that shows off or draws attention to himself. Ruth is also shown to be a woman of noble character. Boaz recognises her loyalty in following Naomi back to Bethlehem. As a foreigner going to glean in the fields, she may have been apprehensive about how she would be received. Boaz's instructions to his workers certainly indicate that it could be dangerous for a woman to glean. Yet Ruth goes to the field and shows practical care for Naomi, her mother-in-law. We might feel as individuals there is little we can do about the injustices of the world. We might feel overwhelmed by our responsibilities and guilty about the times in which we waste God's resources. However, if we want to be of noble character, like Boaz and Ruth, we may begin by praying to God that he will help us to be of noble character, and he will give us opportunities to show justice. The book of Ruth is notable for how little God is mentioned. God is never mentioned by the narrator of the story, but only by the characters. In this, it's like the book of Esther that does not mention God at all. Both stories are about human choices, decisions, and actions. However, it does not mean they are not telling us anything about God. Both stories teach us how God works in the world through people. We have seen how noble or godly characters are exemplified through Boaz and Ruth. The decision that Ruth and Boaz make blesses others. Ruth's bold decisions to stay with Naomi, to follow Naomi's God, and her decision to go gleaning are steps of faith. In verse 3, we are told that Ruth goes out and enters a field. She could have gone to any field, but she went to Boaz's field. In this, we see God's hand guiding Ruth and working his purposes out. Our daily decisions might seem insignificant, but perhaps God is putting us in the right place at the right time. By acting in faith and living a life of noble character, justice is brought about in the world through us. We might not realise the difference God makes through our lives, but the book of Ruth gives us hope that it will. The book ends with Ruth marrying Boaz. They have children. They have grandchildren. They are the great-grandparents of King David. And Ruth appears in the genealogy of Jesus. Through Ruth, God works his purpose of salvation out, and that plan leads to Jesus. Through us, God can bring justice in the small places of the world. God can bring justice that rebounds down the generations. We might not see it, but we can make a difference.